Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah Birch and I do a bunch of things on this channel, but lately I've been really honing in on true crime content. I've really been enjoying making it and sharing these stories, and a lot of you guys seem to be enjoying it, so I am back with another crazy, unbelievable story. This story is pretty popular within true crime circles. If you are a fan or a consumer of true crime, I'm quite sure you've probably heard of it, and even if you're not a fan of true crime, you've still probably heard of it because it was covered so heavily in the media in the States. Oh, also, if you're wondering who this little goober is beside me, this is my brother's dog, Rue. Well, my brother and sister-in-law's dog, Rue. And I have been watching him for the last week, so he's going to be my little sidekick today because Darla refuses to be in the video. So, being abducted out of thin air is pretty much every woman and girl's worst nightmare. And tragically, it's a reality that far too many women and girls face. The idea of being kidnapped or abducted from your home or while out on a run, or someone jumping into your car and holding you at knife point, these type of scenarios literally plague women and girls with fear from a very, very young age. It's not something you would ever wish on anyone, not even your worst enemy in a million years. So why would you wish it upon yourself?
I just got home from work and my wife wasn't there, which is unusual.
You had this beautiful blonde mom of two who all of a sudden had vanished.
She is considered at risk due to the suspicious circumstances.
I knew something was wrong. My first thing was somebody took her.
And that begins the search for Sherri Papini.
So first, let's talk about the infamous Sherri Papini. Sherri Papini was a petite, blonde-haired, blue-eyed bombshell. She was definitely a stunning girl. She had like platinum blonde hair and big, big doe blue eyes. And she looked like your typical innocent, sweet girl next door. Sherri met her future husband, Keith Papini, back in the 7th grade, and apparently the two were actually each other's first kiss. But then obviously, they went on and lived life. But when they came back together and reunited and eventually got together and got married and moved in together, people just thought it was like this fairy tale story, the type of thing that you would watch in a cheesy Netflix or Lifetime movie, elementary school sweethearts who were each other's first kiss reunite in their adulthood and start a family together, and people were really happy for them, and they thought that Keith and Sherri were meant to be. But Keith was actually not Sherri's first husband. She actually had married a man named David before Keith, but the two were not married for very long and ended up separating not even a year into their marriage. And then before the divorce was even finalized, basically, Sherri moved on with Keith, and the two kind of went full force ahead. The couple moved into Keith's family home, which was outside of Redding, California. So all of this case pretty much takes place in Redding, California. Sorry, Rue is very protective. He hears something outside and he's warning me. So a few years into their marriage, the couple decided they wanted to expand their family. So they actually had 2 children. Their firstborn was their son. His name was Tyler, and their secondborn was a daughter named Violet. Keith worked at Best Buy full-time, and Sherri at this point was a stay-at-home mother and wife. From the outside looking in, people would describe this little Papini family as completely idyllic, like the dream family, the American dream. People would also describe Sherri as supermom. That was kind of her nickname amongst her friend group. She seemed to cherish being a mother and cherish being a wife, and from the outside, it looked like she just slid into this role effortlessly. So on November 2nd, 2016, Keith went off to work as usual. As I said, he worked in Best Buy and he was out on the floor dealing with customers. He often didn't have his cell phone with him. So Carrie texted him at around 10:26 a.m. just wondering if he would be home for lunch, but he wasn't able to reply until 1:30 p.m. where he just kind of apologized and said he'd had a long day. Keith came home around 5 p.m. and automatically noticed the house was a little bit more quiet and peaceful than normal. He looked around and nothing seemed out of place. There was no large alarming warning signs, but he did notice that his kids weren't home yet. Normally the kids got home about 4:45. But he didn't really have a reason to panic yet. He was like, oh, Sherri probably just picked up the kids and they went to go get groceries or went on an errand. But he waited a bit longer, and when the kids still didn't come home, he decided to call the daycare just to see what time Sherri actually did pick them up so that he could maybe put some pieces together in his head. And when he called the daycare, they actually informed him that the kids were still there and waiting to be picked up, and that Sherri never came to pick them up that day. And this was when the alarm bells started going off in Keith's head. This was very unlike Sherri. She never would leave the kids on purpose. She was never late to pick them up. As I said, she had the nickname of supermom. So Keith immediately called his mom and asked her to go pick up the kids and take care of them for a few hours while he dealt with this situation and tried to find his wife. So his mother agreed and went to go pick up the kids, and Keith kind of tried to stay calm, but he did go out to search the area surrounding his property because there was a lot of forested running trails, because he actually had remembered that Sherri was in the process of training for a Thanksgiving Day run, and she'd been out running a lot lately, so he thought maybe she twisted her ankle or hurt herself on this run. But that was his first idea, was to go search the forest surrounding his home and see if Sherri was there. He takes an initial look around and doesn't really see anything, and then he gets another idea to actually check the Find My iPhone app on his phone to track her phone to see if it shows where she is, and it actually did give a precise location. Her phone pinged at the intersection of Sunset Drive and Old Oregon Trail. So when Keith traveled there, he immediately noticed Sherri's phone and headphones were lying kind of in a clump on the grass. And when he went to pick it up, he noticed that there was strands of blonde hair tangled in with the headphones, as if they had been sort of violently ripped out of her ears. The somewhat strategic placement of these headphones and phone at this intersection and having the phone turned on so that it could be traced, a lot of people find this to be one of the more contentious points in this case, because it did seem somewhat pre-planned, or just, I guess, too good to be true. He just turns on his phone and magically finds her phone, and then it's right by their house, and it almost looked like it was placed there on purpose for a specific reason. But Keith didn't even have time or bandwidth to play over these scenarios in his head. He just immediately picked up his phone and called 911, which is, I think, what anybody would do. So Sherri was considered to be missing or in danger, so police started investigating and talking around to neighbors, and a witness did claim that they saw a woman matching Sherri's description, petite blonde woman running around 2 p.m. that day in the area where the cell phone was found. But that was basically it. Nobody else had any other information pertaining to that specific afternoon. As local media caught wind of Sherri's disappearance, the story really started to gain traction and blow up. This is the type of story that sells papers, local, blonde, beautiful supermom gets abducted potentially on her afternoon run. This is the type of story. There's children in the hallway, and these dogs are not happy about it. And it wasn't just local newspapers who wanted to know more about this story. This story began to spiral into statewide news coverage and then soon national news coverage. Almost everyone in the United States was getting pumped information about Sherri Papini. Not only this, but local, federal, and national law enforcement agencies began collaborating pretty much right off the bat in an effort to locate and save Sherri Papini. Evidently, there was an immediate great concern for the welfare of this woman. And Shasta County Sheriff's Office put out a press release in which they explained that during the course of their investigation, they actually did 20 different search warrants in the effort to find Sherri Papini. So this was no small task. This was no minimal effort. I shouldn't need to tell you that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of missing people who are still missing today or have gone missing over the last few years that are not getting nearly this much media or law enforcement attention. The reasons for this could be many, but most people would point towards maybe the color of their skin or their status in society, how much money they have, what their job is, what their background is. For all of these reasons, sometimes police or media tend to put in the bare minimum effort to find someone because maybe they're considered a high-risk individual, or maybe there's just racial prejudice and bias going on. And it makes me happy to know that so much effort and attention was put towards Sherri Papini, because of course she deserves that. But so does everybody, you know what I mean? Everybody deserves the same urgency. Obviously, that's just not feasible with the sheer amount of people that go missing versus how tied up and restricted law enforcement agencies are, and people can only do so much. But it's cases like this that really remind me and should remind you that there is a very real thing called white privilege There is a very real thing called pretty privilege. So police are doing their thing, obviously. They're going through Sherri's phone, they're talking to neighbors, and they do discover that Sherri was actually speaking to a man who was not her husband in the week leading up to her disappearance. And she kind of was just like flirting with him a little bit, talking with him, and suggested that they meet up in person when he came to California. This man was located in Michigan, and they did interview him and talk to him, and they pretty quickly realized that he had nothing to do with this. He was just a man talking to Sherri, and that was that. As the investigation continued, Keith began doing various public appearances on like local TV stations and interviews, and he was very, very openly emotional and, for lack of a better word, dramatic during these interviews, and really pulling on public heartstrings. But police began getting a little bit frustrated with him for doing all of these appearances because they worried that it actually could negatively impact the investigation. So they actually started to turn their sights more towards Keith as a potential perpetrator. And this is not surprising to me because if you consume true crime, you'll know the popular saying, "the husband did it." This saying is obviously not always true, but there's a reason it's a popular saying, and because a lot of times men kill their wives. Like more times than I could even count. Or boyfriends kill their girlfriends, or whatever. Basically, it's very common that like one of the closest men in your life, whether that be your husband, your boyfriend, your ex-boyfriend, or even a male family relative, will be the most likely perpetrators of your murder, which is so freaky to think about and like so twisted in so many ways, because you think they should be the ones looking out for us and protecting us. So Keith agreed to do a polygraph test and passed it with flying colors, and he did have an alibi. He was at work. So police pretty quickly dropped their suspicions towards Keith and decided to turn their attention elsewhere. During the investigation, a GoFundMe campaign was launched to continue raising money for the search efforts to find Sherri Papini, or potentially to hire, private investigators and stuff like that. And it actually reached almost $50,000. So by this point, 22 days had passed since Sherri went missing, and Thanksgiving Day rolls around. Keith was obviously very upset to be hosting some sort of Thanksgiving celebration for his children without his wife there, not knowing if his wife is okay, not knowing what's going on. In an effort to keep the memory of his wife alive and to commemorate her on Thanksgiving Day, Keith actually organized a balloon releasing ceremony with people in the community and his friends and family, where they all simultaneously released yellow balloons up into the sky. But little did Keith know that this Thanksgiving Day was going to go a lot differently than he would have originally thought. In a twist of fate that nobody saw coming, Sherri was actually saved that morning. A woman was driving down the highway when she stumbled upon a woman kind of frantically waving her arms and stumbling around with this brown plaid shirt on, and she looked dirty and bruised. So the woman drove on like a couple meters ahead and like safely pulled over on the side of the road, where she called an ambulance, because just by looking at this woman, she could tell that she had escaped some sort of horrific situation.
I was startled to see her. It was dark, and she pretty much just came out of nowhere. If I had swerved to the right at least a little bit, I would have hit her with my car. I figured if she was willing to risk being hit by a car trying to get somebody's attention, that she must really need some help.
Her hands were chained together, her once long hair was shorned off into this choppy bob, she had bruises and cuts all over her. It was very clear that this was Sherri Papini, and they rushed her to hospital, and doctors began to assess her injuries while police were trying to question her on what happened and how she escaped. Her clothes were immediately removed to be processed forensically, and the doctors looked over Sherri's body, and they found that she had large wounds and bruises all over her body, on the side of her face, on her legs, on her arms. She also had a rash developing and wound, sort of like flesh wounds where the chains were burrowing into her skin. So this was on her wrists, her ankles, and her waist. Probably the most gruesome discovery of all was that Sherri had been branded by her abductors. Nobody really knows what it says, but she was branded with what looked to be an E and some other letters on the back of her right shoulder blade. When police saw this, they knew that Sherri had been brutally tortured during her time in captivity.
I think she may have tased me. I don't remember. The next thing I remember is all my clothes were gone.
Police were pretty shocked to find that Sherri had been branded on the upper right portion of her back.
And they said I was branded for him. That's what they said. That's what he likes. It hurts so bad.
In a bed, in her poor face. And I just hugged her, I just held her. I felt like I hugged her for like 20 minutes. I was so happy that she was there, and I was just kissing her all over, and then got like nauseated just looking at her.
Police were trying to speak with Sherri to figure out what had happened and get a little bit more intel so they could obviously go arrest the people who did this to her, but Sherri was having a hard time opening up to police. She kind of kept saying that she couldn't remember anything and she didn't really have any clear answers. While this is not uncommon for victims of severe trauma like this to sort of like shut off their brain, police obviously needed to work with her. They needed more information. So they had the idea to give a tape recorder to Keith. And when Keith would go home and spend the next few days with Sherri, he was asked to kind of question her and prompt her gently in a supportive way and make sure he was recording all the information that she said so that he could give it back to police. The reason that Sherri was so nervous to speak to police was apparently she was told by her abductors that she was going to be sold into sex trafficking and that the man who wanted to buy her was actually a high-up law enforcement officer. She was also told by her kidnappers that the reason they needed to brand her was that it was the specific request of her future owner or master and that he wanted her to be branded for him. Officers were able to collect some DNA from the clothes that they took from Sherri, and they found that there was a male DNA sample and a female DNA sample, but they ran this through CODIS and they had no matches. By this point in the investigation, Sherri was starting to open up a little bit more about what happened to her, and she did claim that it was 2 middle-aged Hispanic women who kidnapped her during her run and tortured her for the 22 days that she was missing. She said that while she was running that day in the afternoon in the wooded area around her house, 2 Hispanic women drove up in a car and kind of hit the brakes and talked to her and asked her if she could help them get somewhere. When she walked closer towards them to potentially try to help them, another person opened the back door and pulled a gun on her. Apparently, they said they didn't want to kill her, but she needed to come with them. So Sherri got into the car and they put a bag over her head, and that was that. It wasn't until a full year after her recovery that Sherri would give police a forensic sketch of the 2 Hispanic women that she claimed did this to her. She said that these sketches may not be totally accurate because apparently the 2 women were wearing like a face mask over their nose and mouth the entire time that they were with her, and they often had a bag over Sherri's head, so her recollections were a little bit hazy. But she did remember being kept in a windowless, small, cramped room where she was chained to a pole, and that they would be constantly playing loud and what she described as annoying Latino music all the time, like all day long. She said that they would starve her, and whenever she tried to kind of fuss with her chains or potentially get away, they would just beat her and abuse her. So she was slowly painting more and more of a detailed account of what happened to her while she was in captivity. The FBI put forward a $10,000 award for anyone who would be able to bring forward information that would lead to the arrest of these 2 suspects, and still no one was able to identify them. Police, by this point, were starting to doubt Sherri and doubt the legitimacy of Sherri's story. And honestly, as the story unfolds, you'll find that more and more people in the internal circle of Sherri's life and also the periphery of Sherri's life, like old friends and old acquaintances, they doubted the validity of Sherri's story from the moment they found out that she'd gone missing. Since 2016, the police and just the media and the public in general have been very divided on this case. A lot of people just felt instinctively that Sherri's story was off and that Sherri herself was off, but it's such a touchy subject. You never want to just jump to the conclusion, especially in the world we live in today, that a woman is lying or a woman is making up this type of trauma. We currently live in a world where we believe victims, and that's extremely good and extremely important. So I think a lot of people were very hesitant to come forward with their doubts or come forward with their hesitations, because imagine that they do find these perpetrators and they admit to everything they did to Sherri, and you all along were touting a narrative that she had made it up and that she was just doing it for attention. You would look like a complete asshole. But still, especially online internet warriors were not holding back their suspicions of Sherri Papini pretty much from day one. I think too, like this was 2016, 2017 when all this was going down, but I feel like now by 2024, especially with like the rise of social media, we see more and more often that people do fake their own kidnappings. People do fake their own injuries. People fake illnesses like cancer. We see that this is happening more and more, or maybe it was always happening, but now it's just being documented online and on social media and on blogs and all of that stuff. I'm going to cover a lot of these cases on this channel of people who have hoaxed the public with fake kidnappings, fake illnesses, etc. I just feel like social media has made everyone crazy. Anyway, back to the case. I get so sidetracked, I'm sorry. A lot of people were also doubting Keith and assuming that Keith and Sherri were in this together and had kind of fabricated this entire story for potentially attention, but more likely for financial gain. But then when these thoughts were going around the internet on like Reddit pages and YouTube videos and stuff, then other people would chime in and literally accost them and be like, how could you even suggest this? Did you see the state of this woman? She was bruised. She was branded. Her hair was chopped off. Not to mention, I forgot to say this earlier, Sherri had lost a lot of weight during her captivity. She was only down to 87 pounds at the time that she was hospitalized, and apparently she had lost 15% of her body fat in the 22 days that she was missing. She looked apparently emaciated, like skinny beyond belief. So why would someone ever do all of that to themselves? Like, who in their right mind would put themselves through that? However, the more and more police started interviewing people from Sherri's past, like, some ex-friends and her ex-husband, the consensus became pretty much all around that Sherri was not only a liar, but a pathological liar.
I assume you were also looking into Sherri's background.
There's some little bit of red flags there.
Investigators talked to her first husband because Sherri had been married before. According to the police, he said, yeah, but she was a real liar. She made up a lot of stories.
And then you had the other half that say she's supermom, she would never leave.
She's a compulsive liar. She would, not talk to you for 3 or 4 days, and then all of a sudden there'd be some fantastical story about what happened.
Shaheen Davari says he dated the mom when she was a 20-year-old youth counselor. Get this, he says he was just 15.
In retrospect, sure, tons of red flags, right? That she was a counselor that was going out with a 15-year-old kid.
Now 35, the professor of communications says Sherri's lies were never ending.
Faking a heart condition at one point, and eventually, not only me, but a bunch of people figured out that that was not true.
There was some infidelity issues in her background that even Keith had told us about.
Issues with infidelity, issues with lying, and a history of running away.
Yep.
I was telling my staff, unless we have some very strong evidence to disprove her allegations, we need to continue forward with the investigation.
Suspicions among the public started to flare even more when the Sacramento Bee put out a pretty scathing article about Sherri Papini's past in 2017. I don't really want to get into too much of the specifics here because I don't find it that pertinent to the case, but essentially it documented several cases in Sherri's earlier life around the 2000 mark where Sherri would vandalize her parents' home, steal money from her parents, and she also apparently called the police and said that her mother was abusing her when in fact she was abusing herself and creating harm on herself. This girl next door narrative, this supermom narrative that she had sort of created for herself was slowly but surely fading away as more and more tales of Sherri's past were coming to the forefront. Another development in this case that sort of propelled forward the skepticism and criticism about Sherri's story was when a law enforcement expert and professor of criminology named Ken Ryan kind of made a public statement suggesting that Sherri's story didn't make a lot of sense. He basically expressed that in the 2.5 decades that he'd been working in this field and was at the top of his field, he had hardly ever encountered a case where a woman was abducted, tortured and abused for almost 3 weeks, and then just released back into society. That just did not happen. He also found it very unlikely, just statistically, psychologically, that the perpetrators of this type of crime that is both sadistic and violent would be 2 women. Most of the time, 9 times out of 10, let's say, the perpetrators of these specific types of crimes are men. It's not to say that women don't ever do this, because of course they do, but to Ken Ryan, he just couldn't make peace with how all of these various elements of this case were not aligning. Finally, the third sort of straw that broke the camel's back in terms of tearing down Sherri's once pristine reputation was a Reddit page sort of came forward and was exposed, and it showed some posts that were created many years ago by a user named Sherri Grafe. And Grafe was actually Sherri's maiden name before she married Keith. The user who created this post was from Shasta County, and as I said, the name was Sherri Grafe, so it's not that far-fetched to assume that this could have been Sherri Papini that wrote this post. And the post was basically her just bragging about all of these times that she used to beat up Latino girls in her high school, and there was a ton of racist remarks and racist slang in there, and she clearly just had a deep-rooted hatred for Hispanic women. So after all of these different things were brought forward, not only did it seem that Sherri was a pathological liar, it also seemed that she was a vandal, a thief, and also a racist. And more people were starting to turn against Sherri every passing day, but there was still a few people, bless their hearts, who were just like, there is no way a woman would lie about this. There is no way she would do all of this to herself. It just doesn't make sense. So still, the public was very split. And to be fair, police did not yet have solid evidence of what happened. These were all just things like floating around the interwebs and various people's opinions that were like stirring conversations. So now we're going to jump ahead to 2020. Police finally got a hit on the male DNA profile that was found on the clothes that were obtained by Sherri Papini when she was rescued. And the DNA was a match to a man named James Reyes, who was actually one of Sherri's ex-partners. Once they discovered this, police traveled to Costa Mesa, which was about 9 hours away from Redding, to interview him and see what he knew.
The FBI field officer and myself went down to James's residence to do the confrontation.
Hello, good morning. Good morning.
We're here regarding Sherri Papini.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out how you know her. When was the last time you talked to her?
Well, me and Sherri dated back in 2002, and I haven't talked to her in years.
There's information that I think you have about the abduction.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I can get. All I know is what I read about it.
And it's not until 53 minutes into this interview that they get Reyes to finally come clean.
I didn't kidnap her, I just... Friend in need asked me for help, and that was that.
What did she say?
She was trying to get away from her husband. Like, your husband beats you, your husband raped you. I don't know what her deal was.
She made up stories. Keith was abusing her. She needed to get out of that relationship.
The ex-boyfriend's version of what happened is radically different.
But you're saying absolutely. It was just you and her in the car. There were no females involved.
I don't know any Mexican girls. I mean, there's no way, man.
He was duped by her, but he went along with it.
I didn't know what the final plan was. Like, were we going to end up together? Was that her plan?
But it's fair to say you were hoping maybe you could get together with her.
No, I wasn't there yet.
On August 10th, 2020, James Reyes was brought into police headquarters for an official interviewing and questioning. And it didn't take long for him to spill all of the hot tea. James explained that him and Sherri met each other originally at youth camp back in the day, but they did date briefly in 2006, just casually for a moment, and then that was really it. But he said Sherri did at some point reach out to him and start expressing that she was being abused and raped by her husband, Keith Papini, and she needed to escape. And Frank, to be quite blunt, does not seem like the sharpest tool in the shed or the brightest man walking around. He just kind of was like, sure, what can I do to help you? And the two were communicating via prepaid burner phones. When police years ago in 2016, 2017 were going through Sherri's conversations and her online footprint, they didn't find any of this stuff at that point. James admitted to everything. He said, yep, we used prepaid cell phones. Yep, I rented a car and drove the 9 hours and picked up Sherri and drove her back to Costa Mesa where she stayed at my house. He goes, she slept in my bedroom and I slept on the couch in the living room. For the 3 weeks that she was missing, she was sleeping on a bed while James was sleeping on a couch in the living room. She asked James to board up all of the windows in the room and to keep her chained up to a pole. She also basically refused to eat, and she was determined to starve herself. And then she began asking James to hit her and create injuries on her. And James pretty much was like, nope, I'm not doing that. Like, that was where he drew the line. but she was adamant that she wanted to be injured. So almost every day she would do something to herself. She'd smack her head off something, she'd ram her body into something, and obviously she cut off her own hair and she refused to eat. She was doing all of these things to herself. I know it seems hard to believe, but it's true. James was very honest. He said, the only thing I did was brand her because that was something she just couldn't do on her own, and she begged me to do it. She gave him the branding tool, she instructed him where to do it, and she just sat there while he did it to her, and he just kind of went along with all of this. I don't even know what to say about James Reyes. He didn't get charged with anything, he didn't get arrested with anything, because all of this, it was Sherri willfully doing this. None of this was against her will, and he was just helping her. I don't think that's legal, but to not question this at all, he just let her stay there and just let her abuse herself every day. And I just don't understand what his mindset was or what he was getting out of this. And police asked him, were you hoping something would happen with her? And he was kind of no. I just don't understand. I don't understand this man. I just truly don't think he's the most intelligent person out there, but maybe there's more to it than that. I don't know. So Sherri was very much committed to the bit, as they say. She was depriving herself of sunlight because she asked him to board her up in a dark room. She was chaining herself up. She was starving herself. She was beating herself because she wanted it to look, which it did look to hospital workers, it looked like the injuries were sustained over various weeks because some were more healed, some were more recent. So all of these details she was thinking through. She wanted to come out of this thing looking like a woman who had actually physically and mentally been through an ordeal, and she did. I do a few squats and my legs start hurting and I'm I'm done for today. That's enough. But this woman's literally throwing her head against the wall and stuff. It gets just crazy. So just to make it perfectly clear, while her friends and family and loved ones are worrying every day about her well-being, praying to God that she has not been murdered, she's holed up in her ex-boyfriend's house, scrolling through his phone and checking out what's being said about her online. She's going through social media channels, going on different news blogs to see what people are saying about her. She's checking in on the narrative that she's created and probably, let's be honest, basking in the attention that it's giving her. It's just so unbelievable to think about. I can't even, her poor husband and children are probably up sick every night with worry, and she's just scrolling through her phone looking at images of herself and news stories about herself. But one day nearing Thanksgiving, Sherri just out of the blue told James that she missed her kids and that she was done with this and she wanted to go home. And James kind of was just okay. So they rented a car again and drove all the way back the 9 hours towards Reading. But I can only assume, I didn't really find clarification on this, but I can only assume she asked to be dropped off along the way because, as I said, she was found on the highway 150 miles south of Reading. So she probably just asked him to pull over and she hopped out of the car so that she could begin her ruse of stumbling down the highway and appearing like she just escaped someone. Because if he just dropped her off right at her doorstep, that would have been super suspicious, and there would have been Ring doorbells who would have caught the license plate and yada yada yada. So like I said, every element of this case, even from the phone with the blonde hair being placed in the grass, everything was premeditated, everything was thought through. And that's why a lot of people equate this case to the Gone Girl book or movie. It would have come out 2 years before this case even happened, and a lot of people joke, but I do think there's some truth to it, that Sherri probably just watched that movie, thought it was a great idea, and thought she could reenact it. So after this very loaded interview with James Reyes, police thought it was definitely time to have another conversation with the Papinis. And keep in mind, this was 4 years after this whole incident took place. So Sherri and Keith were just carrying on with life as normal. Police sat her down and sat Keith down and said everything that they had learned from James. And Sherri just denied. And then eventually police asked Keith to leave the room. And when she was away from him, she started to open up a little bit more and reveal that some of the stuff James said was true. The first thing she admitted was that she had been having affairs on her husband. She was yeah, sometimes I talk to other guys, especially when I'm out of town, and I know it's bad, but it's, it's not illegal. So she kind of admitted that she had been talking to James Reyes, but she wouldn't go much further than that. So after this interview with Sherri, although she didn't admit to everything, police decided they had enough between the James interview and all their own evidence that they collected to go forward and charge Sherri, not only for misleading law enforcement, but also for a fraud charge. As I stated earlier, a GoFundMe page was created for Sherri's family where $49,000 was raised, and all of this money was donated by the general public out of the goodness of their hearts. It was all donated to the Papinis for the explicit purpose, as was stated in the GoFundMe page, to hire private investigators, continue to pay people to search for Sherri. However, it turns out just a few weeks later, after this GoFundMe page was created and Sherri was back home, they just started using this money willy-nilly. Technically, though, the money was given to the Papini family, so it's not necessarily illegal. I mean, I think it is. I don't know. I'm a little confused on this bit, but like, they gave it to the Papini family. And GoFundMes are tricky legally and ethically with this stuff because it's like when you give money, you give money. There's not really that much you can't really fight after the fact. Often it's more like government donations and stuff like that you can legally go after with fraud. But with GoFundMe, it's like you're just donating your own free will. And you never fully know without a shadow of a doubt where that money's going, if you know what I mean. Keith took out the biggest donation. He wrote himself a check from the GoFundMe campaign for $31,000, which he just deposited right into his own bank account. And then Sherri also was pulling out $1,000 here and there to deposit into her bank account. And then Keith also took out another large chunk of money, I think it was about $8,000 from the GoFundMe, to pay off some of his various credit card debt. And the rest of the money, there wasn't even that much left, but the rest of the money in this GoFundMe account was used towards family expenses, aka the general public who donated money to help Sherri be recovered after being abducted. That money that they gave was being used to pay off the Papini's credit card debt and their groceries and their gas. The public is paying for this couple to live, which if Sherri actually was kidnapped and had undergone this horrible ordeal, then I'm sure the public wouldn't care that much. Like, it's like, okay, you know, we helped them pay for a couple months of groceries. We helped them pay to get back on their feet, but like, they deserve it. Look how much they've been through. But the fact that it was now coming out that Sherri had made this whole thing up, of course people aren't going to want their hard-earned money being put towards this random family's grocery bill or paying off their credit card debts. Like, I have my own credit card debt that I need to pay off. Like, why the hell did I just give you $75? And Keith, to this day, has never been charged with anything. He is considered to be innocent in this whole thing. He still claims to this day that he didn't know any of this and that he was equally duped by Sherri. But the way he so quickly snatched that money does give me a little bit of pause. Technically, he didn't do anything illegal. He was just using that money for his own purposes, but it is a little shady. But legally, that's not really what prosecutors wanted to go after Sherri for. They wanted to go after the misuse of government funds. Sherri had applied for this program called the California Victims Compensation Board, and this was essentially a program that would give money to a victim of a horrific, violent crime in order to help them just live. Like, let's say this person can't possibly go back to work or they can't afford therapy or whatever the situation is. It's basically just giving someone money after they've been kidnapped, sexually assaulted, whatever. Like, I think it needs to be a certain level of crime that was committed against you to apply for this. And obviously Sherri being kidnapped and tortured for 22 days would be very eligible. But the FBI believed, which they were right, that Sherri had applied for these funds under false pretenses, claiming that she was a victim when really she was a victim of her own doing. And from 2017 to 2021, Sherri apparently received 35 payments, which totaled over $30,000. So when you add this to the total of money stolen from the public in the GoFundMe campaign and the money put forward by the police department, the fraud allegation towards Sherri Papini actually went up to $230,000. That was the amount of money in total, like kind of across all fields, that was put towards Sherri Papini, helping her, searching for her, helping her recovery, when really she plotted and planned this entire thing herself. Sherri was officially charged in court with financial fraud, but the judge did agree that she could get bail at a bond price of $120,000, which her family and Keith actually did put forward that money, so she was able to be released from jail while awaiting her next trial. But there was 5 conditions that she needed to abide by if she wanted to stay out of jail. She needed to surrender her passport, agree to remain in one part of the state, give up any weapons or firearms, not consume drugs or alcohol, and undergo a psychiatric evaluation program. I think that final condition there, the psychiatric program, probably should have been done many, many years ago, because clearly something is wrong with Sherri Papini on a very deep level. In 2022, Sherri Papini did plead guilty to the charges brought against her, and she was sentenced to 18 months in prison. This was in April of 2022, and literally in this exact same month, Keith filed for divorce from Sherri, which totally fair, and he cited irreconcilable differences. That is a hard word, and that is an understatement. I would say that is an understatement. He also, in the same month, in 2022, filed for primary custody of their 2 children, which makes complete sense. Sherri was going to go to prison. But I guess now, since she's gotten out of prison in 2023, she does have contact with the kids and does have limited visitation rights. But Keith still has primary custody of the 2 kids, who I believe now are like 12 and 10. Sherri was basically right back in the court system, and this time she was going after her husband and he was going after her in their contentious, messy divorce.
Good morning, George. The once married mother of 2, now divorced. Sherri Papini finding herself before a judge again, even taking the witness stand, this time fighting with her now ex-husband over money. This morning, new exclusive images of Sherri Papini back in court. The California mom who lied to authorities about being kidnapped and tortured, now appearing before a judge as part of her divorce proceedings. At time, visually emotional.
I just feel so freaking bad for these kids. Like, the sheer amount of trauma that these kids have gone through in the last 7 years, like not only having their mother be kidnapped, only to come back 22 days later like a shell of her former self, and then having to reacclimate to having their mother back home. And then just when they're probably getting used to having their mother back home, their mother is going to court and then going to prison. And then throughout that entire process, they're probably hearing things at school or seeing things online and all the public scrutiny from the media. And then now their parents are getting divorced and having a messy, volatile divorce. And these kids are like not even 15, like they're still so young, and the amount of life they've lived, I'm just really fear for the well-being of these children, and I blame it all on frickin' Sherri. She started this storm, and now the people who like really have to suffer the consequences are these children. Keith sat down for his first interview in years with GMA, and this was in June of 2024, so only a few weeks ago, and I believe he was doing this to promote the Hulu show. I think he was doing this to promote the Hulu show, the documentary that just came out. And Keith dropped a lot of bombs in that interview. He firstly stated that he kind of believed right from the moment Sherri came home and he saw her that she had made the whole thing up. But, guilt just overcame him and he had to push those suspicions aside because he just couldn't live with himself for even considering that.
Hey yo.
Hey yo. She made us all believe that her story was true. Every single day she committed to the lie, and every single day. And that's what people don't realize. It was every single day.
In the new Hulu documentary series, Perfect Wife, Keith recounts the years-long saga. What made you want to sit down and revisit all of that?
I wanted to get the truth out there and really wanted to let everybody know how convincing Sherri was all those years and how I believed everything that she was telling me.
There were cracks. She was telling other people that you were abusive. She told friends that you'd kill her if she ever left you. Are those allegations true?
Oh, of course not. Those allegations hurt. They're painful.
Did you ever physically or mentally abuse her?
Never.
She apologized in court. But has Sherri ever apologized to you or the children?
No, never. She has no remorse that I have ever witnessed or seen.
Do you still talk to her?
I do not talk to Sherri at all.
Why do you think that She essentially concocted this hoax, disappeared, beat herself to a pulp for 22 days, and then continued to lie about it for years.
I think she wanted me to be her knight in shining armor and run to her, and I think that she wanted to plan a fake kidnapping, but in her version, I was supposed to find her.
I mean, the trust issues that this man would have after all of this. And I imagine still to this day, there are people who really think that Keith was involved in this. I think he's innocent. I do. But there's a few things he did in this case where he didn't really help himself. It's just a mess. But that's the end of this case, guys. That's all I have for you. Sherri is technically out of prison. She served her sentence. And I don't know if she'll ever be able to get a job or get a boyfriend or just live life, because her reputation has rightly so been completely smeared. Honestly, though, I do think Sherri is a fascinating person psychologically. I'm not trying to put her on a pedestal at all. But there's definitely some sort of personality disorder going on here. As more stories came out about her and more people testified to her character, it became very clear that Sherri had been lying profusely since she was a young girl. I know that the Papinis benefited a lot financially from this hoax, and I'm sure that was a motivating factor, but I genuinely think for Sherri, the main motivating factor behind all this was simply just for attention and for public sympathy, and to be able to step out of the reality of her life for a while and to just be the victim and be the star of the show. Pathological lying is one of the telltale signs and markers of other larger disorders, specifically narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't diagnose Sherri, but I would venture to guess that she does have one if not two, of these disorders. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I will be back next week, if not the week after. I'm trying to pump them out every week, but life has been a little wild lately and a bit of a roller coaster. So I will do my best to get you guys more cases where I cover a variety of people who are genuinely just hardly human. So that's it for me. Make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, share, put this on your Instagram, all the things to promote this channel, because I'm putting in a lot of time and effort to get these videos up. And it would just mean a lot to me if you could support me in whatever way you can. It just takes 1 minute of your time. But I will stop begging now before I come across as too desperate, even though I kind of am. But that's it for me. Stay safe, stay well, take care of yourselves, and have a good day.